Good afternoon. I'm Sabar Randhawa. I serve as the Provost and Executive Vice President for the University, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the presentation this afternoon by Dr. Tom Dietterich, Distinguished Professor of Computer Science. He's one of two Oregon State University faculty members that are being honored this year, being awarded the title of Distinguished Professor, the highest honor that OSU gives to its faculty for their teaching and pioneering research and outreach work. This morning we honored Dr. Joe Beckman from the Department of Biochemistry and Biophysics, and Dr. Beckman shared with us his research on ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease. Professor Dieterich's research focuses in the area of machine learning with primary contributions to multi-category classification, weakly supervised learning, hierarchical reinforcement learning, and non-parametric latent variable methods. Applications of his research include such diverse fields as drug design, electronics manufacturing, job shop scheduling, information management, ecological modeling, computational sustainability, and natural resource management. Professor Dietterich is a pioneer in the field of machine learning and has made fundamental contributions which are widely cited, over 18,000 citations with an H-index of 53. He won the 5-year Best Paper Award in the Journal of AI Research for his work on hierarchical reinforcement learning. He has obtained grants of over $30 million and built a world-class research group at Oregon State University and co-founded 3 software companies. Professor Dieterich's service to his profession is extraordinary. He co-founded the 2 leading journals, Machine Learning and the Journal of Machine Learning Research. He served as the executive editor of Machine Learning and has served as the president of International Machine Learning Society. Also, he helped to set the research agenda for the field through his many invited speeches, edited books, and survey articles. He's a fellow of numerous organizations, including AAAS, ACM, and AAAI. In 1912, he was elected to be the president-elect of the Association for the Advancement of Artificial Intelligence. As a pioneering faculty member in artificial intelligence at OSU, Dr. Dietterich led the development of the graduate curriculum in artificial intelligence. He has mentored over 50 graduate students and postdoc researchers. His past students include faculty members at universities around the world and CEOs of many companies. As I have learned over the past few days, Tom has always been fascinated by complex systems, and particularly by computer systems. He feels that the beauty of computer systems is that they can be completely reduced layer by layer to extremely simple components that we can understand. We at OSU are fortunate to have Dr. Dietterich exploring his fascination with computer systems and what makes the world work the way it does. When Dr. Dietterich is not studying complex systems, he enjoys music and foreign languages. In fact, he met his wife singing in the Stanford University chorus. More recently, as I've learned, he has become an aficionado of flamenco due in part to experiences while on sabbatical in Spain. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce to you Tom Dietterich, the 2013 Distinguished Professor of Computer Science. Tom?
Well, it's certainly a great honor to have this chance to talk to you a bit about my research. I want to especially recommend my mother, Charlotte Dietterich, who's here, and 2 of my former students, Xin Wang and Dragos Marginanțu, have come down from Seattle, along with my dear friend Jim Bennett, to give me some support while I give the talk to such a broad audience. So the presentation today is going to be divided into sort of 3 topics, I guess. I'm not going to talk to you about hierarchical reinforcement learning or some of those things. Computer science, like mathematics, can become an extremely abstract discipline. We like to think of ourselves as sort of the kings of abstraction. And I'll try to explain a little about why we think that. But I won't try to drag you through all of those abstractions. So I'm going to talk first a little bit about what is computer science, and then about what is machine learning, and try to illustrate that with some examples of projects I've worked on, and then wrap up with some discussion of ecosystem informatics, which is the big push right now in my lab. So what is computer science? Well, I like to think of it as we sort of have these three domains. There are people's problems, that is non-computer scientists' problems. So I've collaborated with some of you in this room. There are formal problems and algorithms, which are the domain of computer science. And there are software and hardware systems, which are the domain of computer engineering and software engineering. So for example, important computational problem, or problem that scientists have, is to match 2 or more DNA sequences to one another to understand how similar or different they are. And in computer science, we can map that or formulate that to an abstract problem that we call the network shortest path. So we can define a kind of network where there's like a road network, except that the costs on each roadway are the costs of matching one DNA base pair against another. And then the shortest path in that network turns out to correspond to the best match of 2 DNA sequences. That's what I mean by being very abstract, the way we tend to think. Then for each of these abstract problems, we also try to come up with algorithms that can solve them. In this case, there's a very general algorithmic framework called dynamic programming that can be used to solve those shortest path problems. And then we implement that by doing some programming in a program such as BLAST, which very efficiently matches these sequences. And then, of course, that has to run on real computer systems, not just in a mathematical way. And hopefully, the solution that BLAST produces actually solves the original problem. And so I want to emphasize talk a little bit about who is doing each of these steps. So in the first step of problem formulation, this is inherently an interdisciplinary step. You have the domain scientist who has the problem, and then you have the computer scientist who has this collection of abstractions, and they're trying to match their abstraction with your problem. And they may do some damage to the problem in the process, and we'll get back to that in a moment. Then over on the computer science side, we have the sort of core domain that computer science works on, which is studying these abstractions and the algorithms that solve them. Down here, then, we have software engineers who are actually implement the software. And this is much more of a sort of skill-oriented field, and we do teach many of our undergraduates to become software engineers, and they typically get jobs in industry immediately after graduating. And then finally, the last step, is also cross-disciplinary, because now we have this purported solution to the original problem. And it's very important, of course, for the domain scientist to assess, well, is that really a solution to my problem? We may have to iterate around this cycle a few times to really get it right. So some of the things then that computer scientists do in their research, and what counts as a research result, is to study this catalog of problems. So we want to add other problem algorithm pairs to this catalog. We may want to study how the different problems relate to each other, and this is something that really just hit the scene about the time I was a graduate student, was the realization that there are some computational problems, these abstract problems, that cannot be solved efficiently by any computer. At least we don't have a solid proof of that. We believe that there's this wide class of problems that have no efficient solution. And there's also a fairly large class of problems that have no approximate solution that is efficient. This is another kind of fundamental research contribution that computer scientists make. Of course, there's a lot of other parts of computer science that really focus on this software engineering process by building programming languages and software engineering methodologies, the people that design user interfaces so that you don't have to stare at tables of numbers but can interact smoothly with the software, and even the people, the computer engineers who design the computing and network systems. So one of the things I would like to reflect on a little bit is in our curriculum at Oregon State University right now, we don't require students really to learn very much about computing. The recent director of the National Science Foundation, Directorate for Computer and Information Science and Engineering, known as SCIES for obvious reasons, Jeanette Wing coined this phrase, computational thinking. That one of the things that that non-computer scientists need to be able to do is to say, the problem I'm working on might have an algorithmic solution, and to recognize that, and then to work with a computer scientist to try to formulate that problem, and then also assess whether the resulting solution actually solves the original problem. And I think it's very similar to what people need to do with statistics. Of course, we teach our students to solve some basic statistical problems themselves using statistical packages, but it's also very important as working scientists that we can say, you know, I think this problem probably requires some more advanced statistical thinking, and so I better consult with a collaborator who can help me do that. So I would like to see that every educated person coming out of Oregon State University should have this, some exposure to computational thinking. You know, at OSU we have the WIC writing-intensive courses. Perhaps we should also have compute-intensive courses where students get some practice doing this. And of course, as I say here, in every discipline there are some core so-called simple problems that we want our students to master. And even to be able to do some basic programming, perhaps in languages like MATLAB or R or whatever is appropriate to that discipline. So I don't think we want to turn every one of our students into a software engineer, but they should know when they need to call one. So I'd like to see us put some computational thinking into the core curriculum. And I also think, again, by analogy with statistics, that the computer science department or some other appropriate unit should be offering essentially graduate level introductory software engineering for graduate students. You know, in statistics, in our university and many others around the world, there's a graduate series which is essentially introductory statistics but taught at a graduate level of sophistication and pace. And there are many things, you know, I don't know about you, but I don't tend to trust my students' programming very much until they have really tested their code carefully. And there are lots of other techniques in software engineering about how you develop and test code to try to ensure that it doesn't contain errors. So that's my little encouragement to the institution. Now I'll talk about the second topic, which is what is machine learning, and give some examples from my research. So machine learning is the study of algorithms for constructing software from data. Let's sort of unpack that for a second. So, and I'm going to illustrate that by one of the projects that I've been working on here at Oregon State University. So starting in about 2003, Andy Moldenki came and knocked on my door, and he said, I'm spending a lot of my time staring through a microscope classifying freshwater macroinvertebrates by species or genus. And the reason he was doing that, and people at the EPA do this a lot too, is that we use the presence of various species of insects in our freshwater streams as a way of monitoring stream health. So the EPA has this survey they do every year across the whole US with the randomized sampling of the freshwater streams. And it works by having folks go out in the field and they basically kick the substrate of the stream into a net and then pull out the organisms that are there and look at them under a microscope and classify them. And very similar things happen all across this campus. If it's not insects, it's shellfish larvae, or it's grass seeds or pollen grains. There's a lot of small biological stuff that a lot of graduate students spend a lot of their careers classifying or tagging, identifying. So we put together a cross-disciplinary team with Andy Moldenki and Dave Lytle from zoology, Bob Pash from mechanical engineering, my colleague Eric Mortensen in computer vision, and Linda Shapiro, who is one of the senior folks in the computer vision field, and a whole team of graduate students, and developed a device that you can sort of see here in this corner. Actually, these are two different versions of it, where you could drop a specimen into the device, it would photograph it, and then we would try to automatically identify it using computer vision techniques. And then we would pump it out so you could drop the next one in. So everything is in alcohol here. So these are the kinds of images we would get. Here's one image for each of 54 taxa of stoneflies, mayflies, and caddisflies. And so what we want is a computer program like this one that, given a picture from captured by our machine, a computer program should analyze that picture and output the classification. In this case, it would be from the genus Doronuria. So that's the piece of software we want. Now, if I sit down with Dave Lytle or Andy Moldenki and I say, so Andy, tell me how you recognize these things, he'll say, well, when I've been working with them for a while, I can just look at them, and it's gestalt. I can sort of just tell it looks like a stonefly. And it looks like a Doronuria even. And I say, well, thank you, Andy. I'll go home and program up gestalt recognition as soon as I figure out what that means. So the field of machine learning sort of took its genesis from the realization that a lot of the software that we would like to build, we don't know how to write down. We don't have a procedure for coding it up. Maybe we could take a more statistical approach in which we present the computer program with a series of so-called training examples. So we take pictures of, we have like 100 images of Calanurias and 100 images of Doronurias. And then we have another piece of software, this learning algorithm, that's kind of like a statistical algorithm that analyzes those images, and it outputs then this classifier, which is now more like a classification rule that can then take a new image and do this task. And in the machine learning field, we call this the formal problem of supervised learning. The idea is that you have a teacher here who's telling you, giving you supervision about what the right answer is. And so we think of it as you're given a set of input-output pairs, where when I show the classifier x1, I want it to output y1. When I show it x2, it should output y2, and so on. And the learning algorithm's job is to find some function f such that f of xi is approximately equal to yi. And that's what this classifier is. It's some function that maps from x's to y's. So in our project, we developed a couple of methods. One is called stacked evidence trees, or SET for short, and the other one is called local linear classification, which we didn't develop, but our competition did. And theirs, we have recently benchmarked, is slightly better than ours. But both of them are hugely better than the sort of baseline standard computer vision technique that you might apply. And of course, they're much better than random guessing. So what we're saying here is 80% of the images we can correctly predict which of the 54 different taxa of macroinvertebrate is in that image. And whereas if you were guessing at random, you would only get about 2% right. So it's a pretty tough problem. Okay, so that's an example of showing how we can take what machine learning people do is we go out and find problems that require a novel solution. And then we try to develop a new a formal machine learning problem that matches it. This is if you're doing research in machine learning. You're not interested in problems that can be solved with existing techniques. You're always looking for something that will push the envelope and force you to innovate and build something new. And hopefully we then can develop these new formal problems and then develop new algorithms for solving them. And then we'll hand it off to the software engineers to do the rest of it. So what this means is that as a machine learning researcher, I'm always on the lookout for an interesting new problem that doesn't match any of the existing frameworks, that will force me to, or give me an opportunity to develop something new. And so that has led me to working on a vast number of different projects. So I'll talk about a couple of these, but over my career I've collaborated with lots and lots of people because very much like a statistical consultant, we are parasites on other people's problems. It's very hard to do machine learning in the abstract. You need real problems to solve. Well, you can work on made-up problems, but who cares about those? You want to solve problems that really matter in the world. So I'm going to talk about two of those. The first one is in 1991, on our first sabbatical, I joined a startup company called Eris Pharmaceutical, long dead company now. The domain name has changed hands several times, that was working in drug design. And then based on that project, we came up with a new formal framework called multiple instance learning, or the multiple instance problem, and we developed a particular algorithm for it. So what was the problem? Well, the idea was, suppose that there is some binding site on some large molecule, but we don't really know exactly what the shape of that binding site is. So it's hidden from us because no one has crystallized it, or now I've learned we can freeze them, evidently, and maybe we can get structures. But let's say we have a molecule whose binding site is unknown. But what we have done, and typically a drug company would do this, is synthesized a lot of small organic molecules, and we've measured their binding affinity to that binding pocket. And so the goal is, given what I want to do now is, given this unknown binding site and a set of small molecules with their associated binding affinities, say these here, I want to come up with a model. I really would like a model that would show me the right shape for the binding site. But I'll settle for a model that if I show it new molecules, it can predict their binding affinities. And that might let me prioritize, say, which ones I actually run through in the lab, or help me design to try to optimize that. So we can kind of fit this into the supervised learning framework, right? We have inputs, which are the molecules, outputs, which are the binding affinities, and we just want to learn to map from the molecule to the binding affinity. So it matches the formal framework, so we could try our existing techniques. There's just one problem, and that is that molecules are flexible. So when we say a molecule fits into the binding site, it could be this guy, or it could be this guy where he's rotated one of those bonds. Or it could be this stereoisomer or this stereoisomer, right? So there's some uncertainty about which of all the different conformations the molecule could adopt is the one that's actually binding in the binding pocket. And in fact, in our case, we were doing a lot of work with peptides, which can adopt so many different shapes, they tell us very little about the binding sites. And so this led us to this new abstract problem that's known as the multiple instance learning problem. And the problem is that now, actually what I'm giving you is I'm giving you a little bag full of different shapes. It's a single molecule, but we calculate all of its low energy conformations. And then we know that one of those achieves a binding affinity of 14. Probably not nanomolars, probably micromolars, but and say I give you another bag with that has all of the different conformations of this molecule, and somehow as a group they achieve a binding affinity of 36. So that's the problem, and the way we tried to formulate the solution is to learn a function that predicts the binding affinity of each of the different conformers, each of the different conformations. And then we just require that the maximum in this case, I mean, usually in drugs it would be the minimum, but the most active molecule should be the one that matches the experimental measurement. And of course here we're ignoring entropic costs you might have to pay to adopt the target shape and many other simplifications. And so this is how we get a function that maps from a molecule to a binding affinity, is we actually first have to calculate all of its conformations, score each one of those, and then take the maximum. And that's the predicted thing. So that was the abstract case. And the particular algorithm we developed actually was not wonderful, but it recruited a lot of other people to now come up with many other solutions to the problem. And I think still the best one is something called the diverse density ensembles that was developed at Washington University. But this general notion of multiple instance learning, once we had added it to the catalog of problems, many people started to see other opportunities to apply it. And for example, you know, on the internet or in documents, you'll often have an image with a caption. Like this caption might say, comes from a web page that's pictures of dogs. Okay. Now, if you're trying to teach a computer to recognize a dog, I was going to show you the picture without all the boxes over it, but there's a dog right here. I don't know if you can see this very well, right? And then there's a person here with like a dog biscuit. So you would like computers to learn to recognize dogs and cars and cats and so on. But if you just know somewhere in that image there's a dog, but you don't know where it is, one strategy is to take a sub-rectangle and move it around the image, which will generate hundreds of different positions that rectangle could be in, and then say, well, one of these contains the dog, or maybe a few of them contain enough of the dog that you could recognize it. And so now we have exactly the same multiple instance thing. Each image is turned into a bag of little images, and we hope the little images are small enough that they only contain one thing. And so this same framework can be used to try to teach about dogs. Of course, we could ask people to tell us where in the image is the dog. On Facebook, that's what you do. You label images for Facebook by clicking on your friends. And that's how they train a machine learning system then to recognize your friends' faces. OK, so that's the first example. And the development of a framework. And I didn't go into the details of this ID APR algorithm, but you can thank me later. The second problem, and one that I'm currently working on, is the problem of trying to build a continental scale model of bird migration. So it turns out that during the migration season, and it's in full swing right now, billions of birds migrate across North America. And there are a lot of scientific questions people have about this. When do birds choose to start going north? When do they decide to make a stopover, a layover, where they land and say, eat for a few days? When do they decide how to continue onward? And when do they finally stop and make a nest? So what are the sort of behavioral rules that they're following? So you may be surprised that these questions aren't really well answered. And part of the reason is that bird migration takes place over such a large spatial scale that even if you get all of the professional ornithologists in the world out there, you really can't observe it very well. But fortunately, there are a lot of enthusiasts out there, bird watchers, that love to go out and collect data. And now the Cornell Lab of Ornithology that I'm collaborating with, Steve Kelling is the head of their information technology group, and they developed this website called ebird.org, where you can go bird watching and then come and fill out a checklist of what you saw and upload that. And we have about 40,000 people who are doing this regularly, and we're getting, say, 3 or 4 million data points a month, particularly right now, this time of year. People are very enthusiastic. December, it's harder to convince the folks to go out. So we have a team that involves a former postdoc of mine, Dan Sheldon, and a PhD student here, Li-Ping Liu, and then folks at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. Now, the data we wish we had is we wish we could convince each of these migratory birds to carry a cell phone with them, because then we could track them as they flew northward. And this is not actually, I mean, here we can see that the cell phone is bigger and weighs more than the bird. But my colleague, Hua-Ping Liu, in electrical engineering here, had an NSF grant to try to build an ultralight, ultra-low power cell phone that the birds could wear. And it would just register with the cell phone towers. It didn't have to make any calls to be tracked. But unfortunately, that's still too large. So we haven't succeeded with that yet. So in the meantime, since we don't have these actual tracks, now why do we wish we had this data? Well, if we had the actual tracks of the bird, then we could see, well, they were stopped in Alabama for 3 days, and then they moved forward, and we could try to correlate that with the weather and the state of the vegetation and so on, and that would let us fit the model we want. We don't have that. Instead, we have this aggregated anonymous data, which is our eBird observations. So here's a map of the US, and each of the dots on the map is a checklist that's part of the eBird reference data 2.0. And the red dots are positive reports for, which one do I have up here? Can I read it? Indigo bunting. So those are checklists where an indigo bunting was cited. This is pooling over all seasons of the year and for about 4 years of data. And the gray points are points where the bird was never observed by the observers. So this is aggregated data. It's kind of like the data you would have. I mean, you go out bird watching and you see 12 robins out here in the quad. And if you go out the next day and you see 13 robins, is there just one that came and joined the group? Or did all 12 leave and these are all 13 new ones? That's the kind of problem we have, is that the birds are anonymous to us. Another source of data we have is the weather surveillance radar, the NextRad system that's run by NOAA. And it turns out that most migration happens at night. And so what you'll see right now is you'll see sunset sweeping across the United States. Here it goes. And all that blue stuff is birds taking off into the air. So millions of birds take off at sunset, so many that they show up as these big clouds of birds on the radar. And of course, this is a Doppler radar, so we can actually measure the direction, the primary direction and velocity of the birds. And so this is nice because we actually catch the birds in motion rather than just being on the ground. Yeah, so this time of year, I just love to get onto weather.com and look at the radar and say, oh, look, it's a big migration night in the Pacific Valley, or in the Mississippi Valley. The third thing we're doing is some species of migrating birds give off little flight calls as they're migrating. They probably have something to do with coordinating with one another because they give more of them when it's foggy than when it's clear. And so, for every aspect of birding, there is a small group of committed birders. And so there's a group that does nighttime ornithology where they do their birding by ear, listening to recordings of these birds. And so we've been developing software to try to recognize the species of the bird from these flight calls. So the steps we're trying to pursue for our goal, we're about we're in the second year of a 4-year grant on this from the National Science Foundation, is to define a grid of cells over the United States. And then the next step is to try to estimate how many birds are in each cell each day. And we have our bird watchers out there giving us data for that. And of course, the radar is helping some too. Then the hard part is to estimate how many birds are moving from cell I to cell J every night. So it's those transitions that are the key thing that we want to get. Because once we have those transitions or flows of birds from one place to another, then we can look for the correlations with weather conditions, the state of the vegetation, and so on, and try to discover the decision-making rules that the birds are using. So here's some initial results. This is work by Daniel Fink at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. This is just estimating how many birds are in place. We're playing it as a movie, but it's basically a series of snapshots 1 week at a time throughout the year. And this is for the indigo bunting. And this is sort of a clock here. This is January, and that's December there. This is not modeling the dynamics of the thing. It's just saying if you were a bird watcher and you went out to New Orleans on a particular day, like right about now, you wouldn't see any indigo bunting. But if you went out there now, you'd see a lot of them. And so we can see it's very tempting to read this map as if it were a dynamical model, because you can see things are changing. You can also see indigo buntings don't like cities. We'll watch it go by once more. But look at Atlanta or St. Louis, and you'll see there's a black hole in the map because the birds this particular species doesn't go there. So it seems that they mostly come up the Mississippi Valley, then they have quite a wide range. But there you can see Atlanta and Indianapolis and so on. But then southbound, a few of them go off the tip of Florida, according to the fit here. And again, I'm making it sound too dynamical. All it's saying is if you went to the tip of Florida on a particular date, you'd probably see this bird with a certain probability, pooled over many years. So that's just where are the birds at any given time. Now, this is some work by my former postdoc, Dan Sheldon, from his thesis. And here on the right-hand side, you'll see the actual eBird reports. So in this case, the yellow dots are the checklists that did not show indigo bunting, and you'll see blue dots which do. And on the left is going to be the fitted migration model. So we'll be showing the reconstructed motion this is for black-throated blue warbler. So you can see that according to the fitted model, the birds are spending their winters down here. I mean, this is no surprise, in Cuba and Dominican Republic. And then they're coming up the eastern seaboard, and they're summering around the Great Lakes and off into eastern Canada. And you can see the bird watcher data points over there. It sort of quickly flashes by all those blue things. So it's trickier to do this reconstruction because the model has this tendency to, if it sees a bunch of birds that showed up at some place, like New York State, it has to have them come from someplace, because it's basically imposing a conservation of birds or conservation of mass argument here. So it has this tendency to store birds in Canada when it needs extra birds later. And also, if there are parts of the United States that are poor, where we don't have many observers, it can put them there because it's not getting any evidence to tell it that they're not there. So it's challenging. But this is why we think this was done with just the eBird data, and we think with the radar data we'll be able to do a much better job of this. So the abstract problem here, I'm making up a name for it right now, which is collective dynamical modeling. And the idea is we're given collective, so that is aggregate observations for anonymous individuals at various points in time and space. And our goal then is to find a model that predicts where, when and where these individuals move. And the solution that we're pushing is something we call collective graphical models. And the key assumption we have to make in order for this to work is to assume that if we look at all the indigo buntings, they're all following exactly the same rule. So there's some randomness in it, so they don't all start in exactly the same state. But we're assuming that they're behaving independently and identically. So they also don't talk to each other or coordinate or anything like this. We know this is not true. We call them flocks for a reason, but this is the assumption we're having to make to push the statistical model forward. And under that assumption, then if we can estimate the location and the movement of the birds, those are the sufficient statistics for fitting the dynamical model. That is, we don't really have to reconstruct the individual path that each particular bird moved on. We just need to know in aggregate how many birds move from cell I to cell J each day, and how that correlates then with the weather. So there are a couple of other applications of this that we're exploring. So with some undergraduates for the past few summers in our summer REU program, we've been studying moth emergence timing. So here you are, a moth in your little cocoon. When do you decide to come out and fly around? And how does that depend on climate variables? And similarly, we have a project with an undergraduate on looking at salmon return timing. How long does, how does a salmon decide how many years to stay out in the ocean and when to come back up the river, and exactly when to start up? And more generally, as we look forward to electronic health records and the possibility that we may be able to mine those to gain insight into diseases, having tools like this that can work with completely anonymized data and still draw some conclusions, we think will be very valuable. So in summary, I've talked about this idea that people have problems like drug design and bird migration, and then the machine learning research is to develop these abstract problems, abstract forms of those problems, and then algorithms that solve them. And we like the abstract versions of the problems because we hope that one abstract problem will solve many real-world problems. In fact, that's sort of the hallmark of an excellent research contribution in my field, is not that I solved the problem in drug design or even bird migration, but that I came up with a new abstraction that can be used to solve many different problems. And that's why we focus on abstraction. So I wanted to wrap up by talking a little bit about this emerging field of ecosystem informatics, of which both the Bug ID project and the bird migration project are examples. So I'm not hugely happy with the name ecosystem informatics, but the idea is in ecology, there's a big effort now to gather a lot more data than we've had in the past. Of course, we've had the LTER system for a long time now. There's the National Ecological Observatory Network, NEON, that's ramping up. We're in the midst of revolutions in sensors and sensor networks. Maybe we will get those ultra-lightweight cell phones operating. And of course, we're seeing a huge explosion in citizen science, not only as a way of getting help solving these scientific problems, but also as a way of reaching children in K through 12 and getting them excited about doing science and helping us at the same time. So they really don't pretend to do science, they can do science as part of a class project. I think our data isn't as big as the data that Facebook collects, but still we're starting to get extremely heterogeneous kinds of data, which if we combine those with machine learning and statistical techniques, I think has an opportunity to really advance ecological science and also the management of ecosystems. And the central, so for the last 4.5 years, I've been in with a group at Cornell. We got one of these $10 million grants from the National Science Foundation for something we called computational sustainability. And the work that we've been doing at Oregon State has been primarily focused on ecosystem management and then this bird migration problem. So as over the past 4.5 years, we've been talking to lots and lots of people and trying to find what are the interesting computational problems in ecology. And a lot of them seem to center around modeling and managing spatial spread. So obviously bird migration is an instance of that, and so we've already talked about that. But another thing is invasive species. So I'm collaborating with Joe Albers here in Forestry, College of Forestry, on managing invasive plants. And then endangered species is another thing. So while we might want to prevent the spread of an invasive species, we'd actually like to encourage the spread of an endangered species. And so this is a shot from a project that Cornell did on trying to encourage the spread of the red-cockaded woodpecker in North Carolina by buying up habitat and prioritizing what habitat should be purchased. And I'm also collaborating with Claire Montgomery in Firm on the management of wildfire in Eastern Oregon. And there we want to encourage the spread of low-intensity fire to try to burn up a lot of the accumulated fuels in the forest, but we also want to discourage the spread of crown fires that destroy the forest. So in general, I think these are extremely challenging problems because in an ecosystem we have many overlapping networks, right, that operate at different scales, and we're trying to prevent spread in one network, encourage it in another, and so on, manage it in a third, with a large number of conflicting objectives. So I think this is a terrific opportunity for Oregon State University to work on because we have world-class ecology here, and we've been able to build a good machine learning group in the computer science department. And we now have quite a record on campus of taking on some of these big modeling and sensor problems. So Julia Jones spearheaded an effort, and we got a 5-year Ecoinformatics IGERT funded that brought together folks from math, computer science, and ecology. Desiree Toulos spearheaded the Ecoinformatics Summer Institute that I mentioned before, and we just got renewed for another 3 years starting this summer. And then, as I mentioned, I've been collaborating with this thing we call the Institute for Computational Sustainability between here and Cornell. And then there are several projects looking at the different kinds of sensor networks. My colleague Wenkeen Wong is leading a project in bioacoustics for forest ecology. And we also want to thank the provost for supporting the Ecoinformatics initiative, which led to 4 hires, Xiaoli Fern in computer science, Matt Betts in forestry, and 2 mathematicians, Evgeny Kovchikov and Rushali Bokil. It really helped us establish this research program. So I think there's many more things we can do and a huge opportunity for Oregon State to really be unique among universities in the country. So just to wrap things up then, in summary, computer science is the study of abstract computational problems and then algorithms for solving them. Machine learning studies abstract machine learning problems and algorithms for solving them, and I've shown you 2 instances of that. And then I briefly talked about ecosystem informatics and the opportunities to sort of replicate the huge success of bioinformatics for the omics now at the ecosystem scale. So I have a lot of thank yous to make. Of course, I want to thank the department heads and chairs that have supported me through my time at Oregon State. I came here direct from graduate school in 1985 and was hired by Fred Tong and so on, and particularly Walter Rudd, Mike Quinn, and Terry Fees have really provided a lot of support. I want to thank Sherry Pancake and the College of Engineering for developing this thing we call the workload model that allows for variable amounts of teaching load depending on your other activities. And of course, to my many colleagues in electrical engineering and computer science, every project we do basically is a collaborative project with multiple people on it, of course. And so I've also collaborated with a whole raft of folks across campus, starting with David Ullman in mechanical engineering, and I'm currently working with Claire and Joe in natural resource economics. And Ken Williamson, now emeritus professor of engineering, was the one who suggested that we should look at freshwater macroinvertebrates. So, in addition, I want to thank the deans of science and engineering, and particularly former provost Graham Spanier, who, when he was here, made the very wise decision to move computer science out of the College of Science, which, despite our name, is probably not a good description of what we do, and into the College of Engineering, which is a better home for us. And of course, I already mentioned Sabah Randhawa's contribution to the Eco-Informatics Initiative. I mentioned some of my students, but obviously this is their work. I've had several wonderful postdocs and a whole raft of excellent students. And also, I have a couple of excellent software engineers who work on the staff, and my assistant, Pat Sullivan, who, as Joe mentioned this morning, it's critical to have staff dedicated to just dealing with the accounting and management of the projects. To the U.S. and Oregon taxpayers, who've really, as mentioned, I have certainly spent a lot more taxpayer money than I have contributed, and I hope I've spent it well. And we've gotten some support also from industry. And most of all, to my dear friends Jim Bennett and Gordon Grant, my parents, Charlotte Dietterich, who's here, and my dad, Paul, and to my wife and partner, Carol Riffin. Thank you very much. Questions?
Tom, we have time for questions, comments, dialogue.
Yes.
Looking at the bird migration, it's apparent it's a function of the density of observers as well as of birds.
Yes.
And you mentioned sort of dumping your storage into unused areas
Right.
of the map. Do you have any ideas for maybe better coping with this variable density of observers of data?
Well, let me introduce you to Selena Chu, who's sitting across the aisle from you. She's a postdoc who's been working on this problem for the last couple of years. So we have very severe sampling bias because people go birding close to where they live, generally speaking. So we have tons of great observations around LA, New York. Well, Cornell is a special case, and then we have these large areas of the country. So we've been working on ways statistically to try to correct for that. But the other thing we can do is try to create an incentive for our bird watchers to go out other places. In fact, we put into one grant proposal that we would actually try to create a sort of traveling exhibit, like a birder bus. And we would go visit high schools all through North Dakota and see if we could turn the kids on to bird watching and help us fill in that kind of thing. And I still think that's a great idea. We just have to get the right foundation to fund it. But eBird does have a thing now where you can be the first person to see this species in this county, kind of thing. Of course, that introduces sampling biases of its own, because our birders are not perfect by any means. And so, in fact, because before you go bird watching, it's very natural to go look on eBird and see, well, what have people been seeing out there in Newport or whatever? And so this obviously biases you to see what other people have been seeing. So dealing with what we call crowdsourced data, it just raises a whole raft of really fascinating machine learning problems that we're trying to figure out how to solve. Yes?
Tom, I really like your suggestion to introduce some level of basic computer course as a required part of the curriculum. I thought of that a year or two ago too, either through the baccalaureate core or in some other way, because I think it's just such an essential part of the modern mentality.
Mm-hmm.
That I really encourage you, when the opportunity comes up, to push that one.
Okay, well, I believe the strategic plan, is Friday, right? Right.
I've forgotten that it was under Graham Spanier that the decision was made to move your department from science into engineering. Could you discuss briefly why engineering is a better home for your field?
Well, I mean, I joke that any field that has the word science in it probably isn't one. But in computer science, we're mostly concerned with the building of these software systems. I mean, there's always a problem with mathematics and statistics and half of computer science as to where they belong. Are they? I mean, it's not really a science, but we work with scientists to solve problems for them. So we don't obviously fit, but the other half of computer science, which is about software engineering, computer engineering, building systems that are reliable, the main thing our undergraduates were being trained to do is to build software systems that work. Just like in civil engineering, we train civil engineers to build bridges that stay up. It turns out to be a lot harder with software to try to build systems that don't have bugs in them. And so I think that engineering discipline is really the fundamental thing, particularly at the undergraduate level, and makes the most sense for us to be there. It had the other advantage that it gave us control of our enrollments. In the College of Science, we had no way, because computer science has this big cyclical things where we'll have like right now, we had a 20% increase in enrollments this year. We're expecting another 10 or 15 next year. Without having, in engineering, we have this notion of the professional program, right? You have to achieve a certain GPA level in your freshman and sophomore year to be admitted to the major. And this has really been an important resource management problem for us. But even with that in place, we're hiring like crazy right now because we're having to deal with this huge increase in enrollment. But that was another reason. In the College of Science, we had to take everyone. Yeah.
I noticed in your list of topics, you had anomaly detection, security, and I also noticed you have DARPA funding.
Right.
And I didn't see any DARPA-related projects. I came in late, but I was wondering, is that the DARPA-related project?
Yeah, so right now I have money from DARPA for two different things. One is called anomaly detection at multiple scales. And the goal there is actually to look for insider threats in organizations. So if you work for the President Obama signed an executive order in November that any part of the government that is involved with classified materials needs to have an insider threat system in place. And there's a company called Raytheon Oakley Division that sells spyware that they install on the computers of everybody who works in these organizations, and they watch everything they do and collect data on them. And then we're trying to look for unusual behaviors that might be signs that someone is, say, copying massive amounts of documents and copying them onto CD drives to take out of the building. So kind of the anti-WikiLeaks kind of thing. Although it was actually started based on the Fort Hood shooter incident, where in retrospect, the guy that committed the murders, there was a lot of signs in his email that there were some emotional problems. So
it's like a machine learning, word recognition, context kind of thing?
What our particular thing, the algorithms we're developing are actually just generic anomaly detection algorithms. In fact, I got interested in anomaly detection because of the insect identification problem. That if you go out, so my system has been trained to recognize 54 different species of, or genera of EPTs. But when you go out and collect in the field, you probably collect things that my program has never seen before. But it's one of the weaknesses of these machine learning techniques that we were using, that they basically divide up the space of all possible images into 54 groups. So if you stick your thumb in there, it will assign a class to it and say, oh, that looks like a Doronuria to me. And in particular, if there's some novel to the computer species in there, it will get it wrong. And so I got interested in anomaly detection as a way of trying to have the computer be able to say, that doesn't look like anything I've seen before. I should kick it out and have the human look at it. Then this funding opportunity came along, and I said, oh, well, we can fund more of that research by working on this project. And so that's what we've been doing. We're actually testing our methods on publicly available data because, we're not allowed to look at any of the real data.
I've got another question, unrelated. Last week I was at a meeting of the Audubon Society of Corvallis. We were treated to a presentation of an upcoming program called Oregon 2020, which will seek to use citizen scientists to make observations and describe the status of bird populations in Oregon. When you started talking about your work on bird migration, I kept looking for a relationship to that problem, that program for someone. Have you heard anything about it?
I don't know anything about it, so I better learn fast.
The presentation was given by Douglas Robinson.
Okay, yeah. Right.
Wildlife.
Okay, yeah. Thanks. Yes?
In machine learning, there have been a number of approaches like neural networks and various things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, are there any things on the horizon that are kind of new and different that you know of? It seems like there are, in terms of that class, similar approaches that are slightly different, but kind of all similar.
Yeah, I would say, right, I mean, the big, there's a sort of big division in the field between the probabilistic modeling folks who want everything to be a probabilistic model and the, I don't know, maybe call them the algorithmic folks, like the neural nets and the support vector machines and various other techniques. I don't know, there's just a new DARPA program that we have a proposal pending for on probabilistic programming that's trying to design programming languages to support the more probabilistic technique. But the current very hot buzzword in the field is something called deep learning or deep neural nets or deep belief nets. And Google has been hiring all of the people who work on this and moving them to California because they've been finding, so what is it good for? When we were working on our insects, for instance, you have an image, and in theory, an image is just can be viewed as just an array of numbers, and so you could try to input that directly to a machine learning algorithm. You would get terrible results. So you generally have to do some image processing operations on the image to try to pull out interesting features, edges, patches that are informative, and so on. We programmed up all of those ourselves. The promise of deep learning is that you actually give it the raw images. You need to give it many of them, like millions of them, but the web is now full of millions, maybe not of calanurias and doranurias, but certainly of cats and dogs. and through a layered architecture, like 3, 4, 5 layers, these systems are able to automatically learn how to pull out the informative parts of the image. And so it seems that that may allow us, well, the experience has been that it's improving the accuracy of image analysis and also of speech recognition systems for these companies. It's also a topic that's pretty tough to study on campus because the algorithms are extremely expensive. So Google throws 10,000 computers at it to train it. Although the computers are probably in Oregon, but yeah, great.
I was wondering what role advances in statistical analysis have played in your research and where you'd like to go in the future.
So when machine learning started, we thought that we were in computer science and we were just doing a different way of programming computers, kind of the story I told today. About 100 meters away from my office was the statistics department in which people were graduating that would go on to be leaders currently in sort of computational statistics. And every year these two fields merge more and more and more. So in particular, the people that are committed to probabilistic modeling, and that's what we're doing with the bird migration modeling, this is, I mean, could appear in a statistics journal just as well as in a machine learning journal. So the two have come indistinguishable. I don't know if that was the question you were asking or not, but I guess I joke with my statistician friends that we do statistics badly, but we make up for it with volume. So,
but statistics is still in the College of Science.
It is. Well, yeah. Well, it's actually split, right? Some positions are split with ag and some with forestry. So maybe that's the right model. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the thing is, OSU is so great at cross-disciplinary things that maybe that's not. I mean, I think it's the undergraduate program that kind of dictates where you should live, and they don't have one. So. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.